useful. لا وقاعد ورا. Good morning, everyone. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon from wherever you are joining us. And thank you for the friends and colleagues who are in the audience today. I'm delighted to be hosting at Carnegie Middle East Center today a dear friend and Lebanon's new Minister of Economy, as well as the former head of emerging markets at BlackRock, dear friend, Albert Kostanian, who I think needs no introduction as well as Amer, the main anchor for Vision 2030, among many other hats that he wears. Lebanon today stands at a standpoint, at a pivotal moment in its history. Devastating war with Israel, deep economic fragility, ongoing political stagnation, though that has opened up quite a bit, I would say, over the last few months. The country faces monumental challenges, but it also faces an opportunity to orient its future at a moment of global change and regional change. The region and the globe is in a transformative period, one can argue. And perhaps the visit of President Trump to the region which resulted in the announcement of close to $2 trillion of investment agreements with Arab Gulf countries in defense, aviation, and in artificial intelligence. These signal renewed regional investment, momentum, and regional economic uh, that's bolstered by also some proposed interregional trade networks, such as the India, Middle East, and Europe network, as well as the development road that Iraq is also proposing. Closer to home, the lifting of US sanctions on Syria and the prospect of a nuclear deal between Iran and the US will likely impact Lebanon's own recovery trajectory. These are just some of the topics that we will be discussing today. And we're quite fortunate to have both Ahmed and Albert on this panel. Also, I forgot to give a shout out to another friend, our Minister of Industry, who's sitting in the back over there. Um, Amer, if I may start with you. The world is going through a transformative moment, one that began several years ago. President Trump's visit to the region is in some ways a culmination or an emblem of that transformative movement. As I mentioned earlier, he walked away with a commitment of $2 trillion investments. Can you walk us through what this means globally and for the region, whether in trade and labor, politics and economics?
Thank you so much. I think it's truly a pleasure and an honor. Albert, always great to be with next to you. Listen, I mean, the way you put it, Maha, is precisely the way to put it, which is it's a culmination. It's more of a cumulative effort of change that we have started a few years ago. I think what happened in last week, the week before, was sort of a peak of that transformative moment. And I'm going to talk about it in two different ways. First, at the global level. At the global level, the number of truly important shifts that are occurring. First, let me sort of start with the trade, right? All of us are of an age, or some of us are of an age, where we remember that trade relations being completely driven by what used to be known as a multilateral system that was liberal in its core, right? One where you don't deal between two countries, you deal as part of a system, you're driven by competitive advantage. Don't do industrial politics where it becomes more about the markets deciding. We're no longer in that world whatsoever anymore. This idea of trade globalization has become significantly less powerful, right? Now, we're in a world in which bilateral relations are much more important, where non-economic considerations often dominate decision making in economics, and where a notion of transactional interest dominate only the competitive market base, right? So that the word is already changing, and as a result of it, is already occurring. And as a result of it, there's a complete shift in the way trade is occurring at this point, right? The world in which really we had only two trade partners, the US and China, is no longer powerful anymore. It's no longer driven. Now it's much more about China. But I'm sorry, India, Vietnam, it's about Bangladesh, Mexico. Mexico has emerged as a huge winner out of this transformative moment. So that's on the one side, one huge development that is. Second is capital markets. Again, we had this throughout the 90s, there was this notion of unfettered capitalism, unfettered global mobility, where there's very little this central policy, central governments. There was much more left for markets. That word has also changed a lot. Money now shifts, again, much more on political grounds, much more on national interests, much more bilateral rather than multilateral, much less globalized than it used to be before. Now, within that context of globalization and trade coming to, I don't want to call it continent, becoming curtailed, and capital mobility also becoming less unfettered, there are winners and there are losers. And I'm going to say that the Gulf has emerged as one of the winners out of that situation, out of that shift, right? The days in which North Asia, and it used to be the main beneficiary of the old model system, today we have new winners. India is a new winner out of that. Mexico is a winner. And I think the Gulf is also potentially emerging. And the Gulf countries have clearly shifted into a process of modernization, institutional building, trying to benefit from this new world reality order that is emerged. And again, the visit of last week was a bit of a culmination of that marriage of a new economic way of thinking, driven by President Trump, who really articulates that word of new economics, new globalization, and the Gulfing countries led by Saudi Arabia that has also seized, has formed itself, modeled itself to benefit. So I think there's actually, they're going to emerge winners out of this. I think we saw that last
Sorry. Albert, let me turn to you then. Walk us a bit through through this moment. If you could maybe zoom in a bit more on the political implications of this transformative movement, what this means for our region in particular.
Thank you. All right. So I'm honored to be here, especially with Amer and with all your guests today. It will be difficult for me to disagree with Amer, so I'll always try to find a complementary angle to the question. So first of all, let me say that what we have seen last week is, of course, a culmination, like Amer said, but I believe we will have many challenges ahead to materialize all those commitments. So we have seen also previously some commitments of the sort, namely in the first Trump mandate, that didn't completely materialize. This will depend on the whole stability of the region, on the oil price, and the whole macroeconomic structure, which is not still, of course, fully stable. But some key lessons learned. First of all, is we have seen or we are witnessing a displacement of the center of gravity of the region to the Gulf. And this is very, I believe, deep, and it will shape the region for the years to come. And this will be at the expenses of an old paradigm. It's been 10 or 20 years that we are repeating that this whole region is dominated by three non-Arab powers, so Turkey, Iran, and Israel. It's pretty striking to see that Israel is peripheral today in the economic sense of not the strategic one. Of course, Turkey retains all its importance, and Iran is in a position to negotiate with an empire that is crumbling in the region. So the center of gravity is there, and there is a transformation also whereby the Gulf states are for being increasingly positioned from a market to a producer, a partner. And this is new. So I was really puzzled by all the announcements, namely on artificial intelligence, where the Emirates and Saudi are emerging as global players due to the energy consumption, of course, of AI. But they have also a lot of cards to be a global and to win, which will increasingly become the main geopolitical or economic also battle of the next decade. The question is about Mashrek, Levant. So are we still relevant? So there is a train today led by Gulf who left the station, very promising views that might not materialize fully, but definitely some of it will materialize. And the Mashrek is still in a position of transition between a failing Iranian dominance and something new that still didn't materialize. So I believe our whole challenge today is to catch up that train, get rid completely of the old way of thinking, and modernize ourselves.
Building on this, Amer, on what Albert just said, you recently participated in the Arab Economic Summit and then in the Arab Summit in Baghdad, which also addressed economic cooperation, regional realignments. Can you perhaps first discuss what the development implications of the new roads that I talked about, the trade networks that are being proposed, but also if anything has come out of these summits, what role, if any, Lebanon can play in this process, especially given what Albert just said?
Thanks. I couldn't put it. I mean, unfortunately, we're going to end up on everything. I can't disagree with the way Albert put it, which was that, and then I'll come back to the subject. And the way he put it, which is the trend is moving, a transformative moment has occurred, it's coinciding with the global shift. The Gulf is very much in front of it, much leading it. I would add actually a couple of other countries. I would add Morocco to this as well, where the decisions. The question is, will the rest catch up? Will the rest move and decide on this, right? Here, though, and this is why I come back to the summit. Here, though, I distinguish between centrally central allocation of decision making, where we try to catch up in a centralized way, or one where we let the society and the private sector make that decision for us. I actually, not being uber liberal about it, I am very much in the latter group, right? Where the Mashriq in particular, and Lebanon, specifically Lebanon, is well poised. I mean, it has everything that it needs in order to be to move ahead, right? It's not clear to me that we can dictate it by policy. It can actually occur by itself. We have a private sector that is extremely vibrant. A private sector that is actually quite sophisticated with a fairly strong balance sheet. Right? We have enormous output gap, right? We're starting from a point that is well below our potential. So just to catch up, the investments that are necessary in order to get up as countries in the region, countries much Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, right? The amount of investment is needed to take us back to where we need to be is absolutely enormous. We have a location that is unenviable, right? Or enviable. Like everybody wants to be on the Mediterranean, on the southern part of the Mediterranean. We tend to have a diaspora that's extremely sophisticated with excess capital, right? Excess savings. It's relatively easy for us to catch up and get into that new transformative moment that is held that's led by the Gulf. Again, here I hope I don't speak here. Policymakers are not going to be the ones to make that decision. It has to be done by society and the private sector. And that's really a political decision more than anything else. The society has to accept it, has to transform itself. The world is shifting, they're moving ahead, they're growing, they're doubling their GDP, and most of us are still stuck at the very bottom. We need to catch up. We have what it takes.
I like the bullish. Albert, given what Albert just said, and yes, we have what it takes, but Do we really? What is it that Lebanon needs to do to secure a foothold? And what are the steps really needed for us to catch up?
Yeah, in fact, okay, we will stop complimenting each other, because I fully agree with the fact that the private sector will somehow benefit. I say somehow because the private sector is pretty much anchored into the Gulf economies and into the regional economy. And with the crisis, we are much more external, onward-looking than we were before. So I believe we will have some externalities out of this positive momentum that will benefit a very small economy like the Lebanese one. We shrunk by 50%. So yes, a small spillover effect will definitely be positive and will be felt by everyone in this time and beyond. Now, this being said, I believe that we still have a lot to do in terms of prerequisites to have a seat in this train. And here it will be a mix of politics and economics. We have very clear prerequisites. The first prerequisite is the full disarmament of Hezbollah. And this is not me saying it. I said it for long years, but today it's the international community. Today it's a very clear prerequisite. If we don't do that, we will never get a seat, or as we say in French, strapontin, so a small seat in the train. And this is a process that must be started ASAP. To get the full-fledged benefit of this regional momentum. The second one is the reforms. So reforms is a very broad term for a lot of things. I believe this government has done a lot it's been 3-4 months, so they've done a lot, but a lot still needs to be done. So in 6 years, we've done nothing in terms of reforms. So we still have a lot to be done. There is the whole IMF SLA. I believe we will talk about the IMF later. But a lot to be done to meet the prerequisite, to have a ticket, to have a say, and to enter this regional train. And I believe it's very, very important for Lebanon to do that because we risk to be sidelined. And if we are sidelined, if we miss this rare opportunity, there is a window that is wide open. This will sideline us for maybe years or maybe a decade or more.
I want to analyze this one. I know I'm talking about Lebanon much more, but a very similar line of arguments with Albert said, I think applies to quite a few of the Muslim countries as well. We're in a moment right now where is Syria, huge potential, right? Egypt, Egypt is an enormous potential if they get their act together. I've been going for some reason a lot to Baghdad, to Iraq. Enormous amount of potential as well. And the same thing that applies to Lebanon applies elsewhere. And if we can if that catch-up can be regional, I think we could talk about the new paradigm.
I like actually what you ended with, new paradigm, but also two words that Albert used, which were, getting on the train, which was one, and not a seat around the table, but a seat in a train that's already moving ahead. And I think and the spillover. And we will get to talk a bit about the spillover in a moment, because obviously what's happening in Syria and in other places. What you just said, the spillover in the region can lift us all up, and not just one country necessarily. But before we go there and move more to start drilling more on Lebanon, I wanted to ask you a question, which is, it's a bit speculative, but what do you see as the positive spillover of an Iran deal between the US and Iran at the nuclear deal? Particularly because President Trump, VP Vance, and many others today are talking about the reintegration of Iran into the global economy. So what would this mean for the region if that were to take place?
Transformative, right? I'm going to echo sort of a framework that was already said, which is prosperity, growth, convergence really is a two-legged monster. You need economic reform, political reform. Without political reform, without security reform, it's very hard for me to see us transforming the way we all want to transform. And then let's be very clear. This is about controlling borders, and this is not just for Lebanon. All the countries I mentioned. Controlling borders, stopping smuggling, stopping sort of the informal economy, absolute monopoly over arms by the state, institution building, stopping corruption. These things are absolute necessities, right? Without which we're not going to be able to grow, right? But then there's obviously the whole economic files, which are quite a bit compared to that. But this idea of marrying economics and politics, economics and security as prerequisites for growth, in a way that, I mean, listen, we all know it. We're a deal where comes back to the international community, where Iran becomes part of a new order in a way that is not imposed, hopefully can be done peacefully, hopefully can be done smoothly rather than in a violent way. Right? I mean, let's not forget that Iran has always been a very important part of the West. Until 79, again, without getting into whether pre-79 was good or bad, but they've always been part of an international economic order. If we can do that change in a smooth, non-disruptive, agreeing way, you can, to a large extent, at least solve for the political constraint. And that political constraint, sort of getting it done, will help a lot with the economics as well. So I see it as a categorical positive if there's an agreement.
As well, of course, I see it as a because I really believe, first of all, for Iran internal stability, it's a necessity. So Iran is a 95 million population, which is a huge, and what's very striking is the youth of the population. So like 23% under 14 years old, and half the population is under 35 years. So those are people that are longing for economic growth, for stability, for development. And the Iranian regime misused the huge resources they had by fueling the revolution and trying to destabilize countries like Lebanon, like Iraq, like Yemen, like Syria. So I believe that today we are witnessing the rise and the development of a project which is the Gulfic project that is being global. It's one. Witkoff, the special envoy of the President of the United States, said that Gulf states could be the next Europe. And I believe this is not very far from the reality if they unite, if they put in place a proper governance scheme, etc. While you have the Iranian project, which is militarized, dogmatic, about really some old concepts that are about controlling population who has crumbled. So if Iran comes back to the market, it will bring extraordinary creativity. It's one of the few countries in the region which has a thriving cinema. I'm a big cinema fan. I see the creativity they have in this country. They have a lot to give: art, creativity, engineering. It's a very advanced country, obviously. So with a lot of this young population, so I believe this all could, in a best scenario, in a dream scenario, be funneled into a creative process which will bring a huge stability to the Middle East.
I couldn't agree more. And I think also if you follow some of the debates within Iran today, that debate is happening between those that want to push for change and those not.
Absolutely.
Like everywhere else. All right, let's now begin to drill down a bit more on Lebanon. Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately. Amer, you recently attended the 2025 spring meetings of the World Bank Group, the IMF World Bank. What was your main takeaway from these discussions? And did you sense that Lebanon still has international goodwill to build on, especially when we put it in the context of what Deputy Special Envoy Morgan Ortega said a few days ago, which is that Lebanon may not need an IMF deal after all. It can, recover in and of itself. So two questions in one, kind of.
Absolutely. Perhaps allow me to start with the latter. and this is, I'm actually speaking for myself, but I suspect my colleagues will also, the cabinet will also agree, which is that I didn't see anything contradictory in the way Ms. Ortega was mentioning, right? The argument that she was making is an argument that we've all been making, which is if we do our act together, if we get our act together, do the economic reforms, then we may not need, right, international funding or international loans. Right? At the end of the day, borrowing for the sake of borrowing is not something that we want, right? What we want is to do the kinds of things that will generate the kinds of capital, growth, prosperity that Lebanon deserves.
And that will give us the credibility.
And no, again, there is an argument that the IMF gives you two things, right? It gives you a bit of a bridge financing at the time when you sort of need it, very short period of time, relatively limited amounts of money. More importantly, it probably gives you also a stamp of approval after a huge credibility gap of years and years of not doing. But the point I'm making is that if we do what needs to be done, what we want to do, not what the IMF is telling us to do, what we need to do, right? Then at some point, the structure of this country, the structure of the private sector, the amounts of excess saving that is available especially with the diaspora, the opportunities in the region that we just talked about, right? That alone will generate the kinds of real investments and real capital that is significantly more than anything that we can do through borrowing. So I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think that's the essence of what you were saying, which is that Lebanon should not be seen as a country that is borrowing and moving from one set of donor funding to the next. We're not that. We're a country that has the capability, the ability to grow. We are well below where we should be. If we do our homework, if we put the reforms, we can generate the kinds of laws without having to borrow from the international community. That, to me, is the essence of it. And that's something we've been saying over and over again. Right? Now, the good news, and this is to your point, to your question, Maha, the good news is I think the international community actually is truly supportive. I sense that very strongly when we were in DC with Minister Jaber and with Governor Said. And again, I hate to say this, but because we were doing fairly basic things, right? We went there with speaking from the same page. They weren't used to the Lebanese speaking from the same page. We went there knowing what needs to be done, right? We had a very realistic, pragmatic sense of where we need to do. And we went there having done something, right? Not least the bank secrecy law. The fact that we were doing these things, on the other side, the willingness of the international community to meet us more than halfway through was quite clear. They really want us to succeed, right? Now, I don't want to underestimate, please don't take what I'm saying to mean that I'm underestimating the amount of things that we need to do, the homework, the files that we have to work on. Maybe we should talk about them eventually. But what I'm saying is that if we do them, if we're committed to doing them, the international community is more than ready to meet us halfway through and even more. And I speculate, and with strong conviction, we can get international capital to get us to where we need to be without necessarily that sort of that donor umbrella that so many other countries rely on. We're different in that way.
Albert.
Here you will see me disagree with my friend Amer.
Precisely why I didn't ask a question. I just said Albert.
Okay, so I'm strongly convinced that the IMF is the best way forward. Not because I don't see it as a donor or I don't see it as a donation. I see it as a program, as a stick and a carrot to get things done, which we won't do alone as a Lebanese. And I hate to disagree with Ms. Ortegus. It's nowadays a crime of lèse-majesté to disagree, but I'll take the risk to disagree. So I believe that the Lebanese, the inertia of the Lebanese society and the whole stakeholders who were preventing reforms during the 6 years that we passed are still there, and they will do everything in their powers to block reforms. And without an IMF, the IMF discipline, I'm pretty much afraid that this whole thing would be at risk. I want to remind also the audience that during these 6 years, we passed through different phases. I remember very well when the crisis started, the dominant narrative was that there was no crisis. And this was for a purpose, and the purpose was to prevent capital control. To prevent capital control, so the politicians that are influent and some bankers and some influent people in the country could get their money out. The second phase of the crisis was, it's not a crisis of solvency, it's a crisis of liquidity. So we heard that for 3 years, and the purpose was to torpedo all the plans, the restructuring plans. Now, I'm not a big or a huge fan of the Lazare plan or any plan. I'm a fan of a plan. So to sit on the table and to discuss a plan, and then we can calibrate, we can, you have some sound principles, then the quantification can be calibrated. And this was not done precisely to avoid accountability, etc. We are now, I believe, in phase 3 of the counter narrative. The phase 3 is we are acknowledging finally 6 years after that there is a crisis, but there is one culprit of the whole crisis, and it is the state. And this is very also convenient because the state is not really loved by the people, and to put all the responsibility on the state is quite convenient. But I would love to put the whole responsibility on the state, but my concern is that the state doesn't have the means to take the burden, and this will be conveyed to us, taxpayers, and we will have to pay the bill for decades. This is my problem. So I believe that the IMF, with the financial orthodoxy that it will provide and with the guidance and the principle, will help Lebanese do a proper program, a proper settlement that is in the benefit of the Lebanese people. The $3 billion that the IMF will give are, yes, helpful. And here I understand Ms. Ortagus and what Amer said, that we need to exit this mentality of donation, donation, donation. Yes, if we do the proper things, we can live without donation, but I'm pretty sure that we will not do the proper thing without a good stick.
Okay, Amer, before we move to the national agenda, can I get your reaction on this, but also drill down a bit maybe on the issue of what is, you're a reform-minded minister, but working with the parliament that was elected several years ago.
So clearly in economics and policy, there's no black and white, right? But allow me to be a bit optimistic, and allow me to sort of make the argument that this time looks to be, to me, as far as I'm concerned, a bit different. I think it's a bit different, and it's maybe time to be a little bit courageous and say the way things were done, maybe this time could be different, right? And again, the last 4 months, I think, hopefully gives some optimism that we're doing it in a slightly different way, right? Remember, we have a new president who's clearly extremely popular and very committed to a particular path. And he has a political base and a political that is cross-sectarian. We have a prime minister that, honestly, I don't think he needs any, like his CV is unbelievable, right, in terms of what he can do and where he comes from, and right, and we have a cabinet, forced modesty aside, it was not that bad, right? I mean, you have a few decent people, I mean, some better than others, but who are actually committed to this. The internal balance of power has shifted, right? I mean, why it shifted, how it shifted, it shifted, right? It's like there's a very different balance of power than used to be. The point I was making before, international support for Lebanon is actually strikingly positive. Right? You'd think that after years and years of not doing what needs to be done, they would be much more skeptical. They seem to be, if you guys do your homework, you can actually achieve. I am chosen to be more optimistic that this time something can be done. And I go back to the point that this is not a replacement for reform, the IMF, right? We need to do the things that the IMF says needs to be done, but we need to do them because we think they're the right thing. And because of the way I described it, new political reality, new balance of power, and international support, this time we may be able to do them. Now, they're not easy. Let me just conclude here and say, please don't take what I just said, meaning that what needs to be done is easy. They're very difficult. They're very painful. They're quite elaborate. I mean, the files are obvious. We have a financial sector to completely rebuild. We have a public sector finances that need to be completely restructured. We have a huge amount of sectoral problems, electricity being the big one, but there are so many others. We have a state-owned enterprise regime that needs to create value of the things that we actually need. You have a whole institutional governance, corruption, sort of money laundering, everything, the cash economy that needs to be worked on, all in a world in which the resources, the data, decision-making is quite weak, politics is complicated. I don't want to sound naively bullish, right? I think the environment has changed. I think what needs to be done is very, very complicated. But I'd like to believe, I've chosen to believe, that we're in a moment right now where it's okay to be cautiously optimistic.
I agree.
All right. Cautious optimism. I will come back to you in a second on the national, the reform agenda, in more detail, and a national vision. But Albert, let me ask you your thoughts first on the economic vision that is emerging from within government. I mean, do you see an economic vision? Can we talk about a coherent economic vision today across multiple ministries, or is the reform effort at this stage really largely reactive and being shaped by external pressure?
No. Okay, if the question is kind of an appraisal of the government action, I believe this is genuinely the best government we have seen in 3 or 4 decades in Lebanon. So, and this is very genuine really thought and appraisal. But I still believe that it's not sufficient because the gap is so huge and the challenges are so big that we need more than that. I have a sense that we still don't have a coherent vision, not due to the Prime Minister or to the government. Maybe we will have the chance to maybe talk rapidly about that, but due to the nature of the Lebanese political system. So I don't see yet a coherent vision being expressed in the ministerial declaration, who was to me quite a disappointment, to be honest, because I thought that this ministerial declaration was pretty, let's say, it was the same old material that was a bit reshuffled, but I didn't see a vision that is proactive, coherent, powerful enough, and being cascaded to the ministries. What I'm seeing is excellent action by the ministers themselves, who have all of them in transportation, in economy, in finance, health. I'm seeing positive actions everywhere that are trying to bridge that huge gap, to rehabilitate. I know the challenges are huge. I'm speaking with many ministers and they are telling me the state of the administration and the resources they have. Maybe Amer cannot speak about that, but I can speak on his behalf. I know they have nothing as means, as tools of action. So a lot of positive momentum. I'm also very cautiously optimistic. I believe we are heading in the right direction. But I would like to see a national project emerge. I would like to see this Vision 2030, not because it's the name of my program, because I believe this is the way to federate Lebanese towards a goal of prosperity, of to be relevant in this region. And I would like this to be cascaded into an action plan. So you have prerequisites, obviously the infrastructure, the electricity, etc. You have also a second step, maybe digitalization, and third, you might have some sectorial policies. We can also dwell on this, but this is a bit lacking today, Maha, and I believe this is the next step for Amer and for the government as a whole.
I mean, I think Amer has already made a lot of statements, many of his statements actually keeps talking about that Lebanon requires more than technical adjustments, that meaningful reform has to be grounded in a broader national vision. Do you want to comment on any
Yeah,
elements in that before we move to
absolutely.
the reconstruction file?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And maybe 3 or 4 reforms or 3 or 4 key issues in this national vision that you think can be done within this year, or you would like to see done
Absolutely.
before the
Listen,
end
the
of the year.
starting point, let me contextualize it a little bit. The starting point, and I feel extremely strongly about this, and if that vision hasn't come across, obviously then we're not doing something right. But I know that Prime Minister Salam is very committed to this. I know the President is committed to this, which is that, and this is on the economic front, our economy has no business where it is right now. We're not here after cementing the moment that we're in. We're here for recovering and getting back to where we should be, right? And let me be more precise here. Lebanon has no business being a $30 billion economy. And I can have a debate on whether 30 billion is the right number, whether we're capturing informal finance properly or not. This is not a technical statement. This is a statement that where we are right now economically, the kind of value add that we create, the kind of economic production that we're doing, where we're relying on remittances, we're relying on transfers as opposed to producing productively, is not where Lebanon is, not in a romantic dream way, but in a general equilibrium economic discussion of where Lebanon should be. If you look at the competitive advantage of this country, and I'm not going to go through it, we all know them, right? I mean, exceptionally strong economic education, the location, the amount of diaspora, that we have, an incredibly resilient, I know it's a horrible word, incredibly resilient private sector that is in a pristine condition financially. That kind of economy does not deserve to be at 30 billion. That kind of economy, that kind of resources that we have.
Some of our representatives from the private sector are saying not true.
We'll talk to them afterwards, but no, we can compare. No, but this is a private sector that has no debt. This is a private sector that has cut costs massively, and this is a private sector that has diversified internationally, right? It's a private sector that is suffering from weak demand, right? There's no demand. But it's a private sector where no liquidity, right? No capital. But this is a private sector that is ready, if you give it the right conditions, the right amount of financing, the right amount to take off, right? So what I'm making, the broader point I'm making here is that this Lebanon, that if you imagine it where we need to be, we should be twice where we are right now. Doubling this economy is not something that is out of the question, right? And the way it would work historically, usually after a crisis, is that you go through a couple of years, again, if you do what needs to be done, a huge if we do the reforms, we can go through double-digit growth for 2 years, right? There's not out of the question. We can grow 10%, 15% for a couple of years. And my sense, my reading is that the potential growth for Lebanon is closer to 5%. It's not 2 to 3, it's 5%. If you do the math, we can double this economy in 6 to 7 years, right? This is the vision. The vision is to take Lebanon back to where it is, where it should be, and that, where it should be, is twice the size of where we are now. And with that comes enormous amounts of investment, profitability, better consumption, return of our labor, right? The vision here is let's do what needs to be done, the financial sector, sectoral policies, create value of the state-owned enterprises, institutional reform, bring back the state, do these things, and if you do them, the fruit is enormous. You can double the size of this economy within few years. That's the vision.
Albert, would you care to comment on that vision? But also I'd like you to bring in, I mean, Amer is describing a fantastic vision of where we could be at a time also when it's not just that our economy is shattered, but good chunks of the country have been devastated by a conflict with Israel.
Yep.
So maybe you can fold in a bit also the question of rebuilding and reconstruction, not in terms of only physical terms, but also economic and political and social.
Yeah, thank you, Ma'am. I'm very much excited by the goal that Amer has put, and I believe it's feasible because we were there. So it's ambitious and not ambitious in the 2018-19 GDP was around 55 billion, if I'm not mistaken, and the informal sector is a question mark, especially back then. So yes, but I believe that a vision should be a bit more, let's say, precise than that. What is our role? What is our value added in the region? What to export, etc.? What is the business model of the country? And I know Amer is working on something like that. It takes time. And here, there is a junction with the political reconstruction. I believe that when you don't have a national project, a political project, it's like a plane who flies at a minimum altitude. When the plane goes below 5,000 feet or etc., it will collapse, it will crash. And this is what's happening to Lebanon, is that the national project is not elaborated, present, accepted, and we are backed into our own retrenchment and isolation, etc. So I think we have a lot of a big political challenge, especially after the war. Everything that we are saying has prerequisites, Maha, and the first and the most important one, and I would like to stress on it again, is the disarmament of Hezbollah. This is, for me, a national emergency. Disarmament of Hezbollah, not by force. I'm not talking about a coup or asking the military, the Lebanese armed force, to go disarm by force. But this goal must be enshrined, a process and the timeline must be put in place ASAP, and we must move forward. I know it's delicate, I know it's, but we cannot live due to external, internal, and having tried the Hezbollah formula for decades, we cannot continue to live with weapons outside the realm of the state. This goes also for the Palestinian arms, and this is very important for the stability, the investment, the readability of the whole situation. I also believe that we have a big challenge, maybe today, under the light of the emergency of the reconstruction, of the economic crisis. We are not talking about that maybe enough, and that is our political system. This is the biggest, I believe, also block to us advancing. I believe, and this is a very personal belief, that sectarianism and sectarian fears are the two obstacles to a modern Lebanon. And sectarianism, for me, is not the answer to sectarian fears. And I see Joyce Al-Khouri, we discussed a lot about this matter together. So you have other answers to sectarian fears. First and foremost, we must not ignore sectarian fears and saying those people are retarded because they... No, no one is retarded. This is totally legitimate, but continuing in this same sectarian system whereby the ambassador to Paris must be a Maronite and the ambassador to the UN must be a Sunni, and etc., etc., this is the recipe for disaster and clientelism and sectarian parties, etc. We must reinvent ourselves. For me, a very wide decentralization is, of course, on the top of the answers, and also a power-sharing formula and the Article 95 of our Constitution caters for an evolution of the Constitution. We should start reflecting about those matters to build a solid future.
I think I was going to ask on any further thoughts, but I think you both ended on, my last question was going to be on where you would like to see Lebanon, but you both ended on where you would like to see Lebanon. So I want to open it up to the audience for any questions. Nabil and then Salah. And then we'll go to the back. Badna al-mic, Honi, please.
Thank you for a very insightful analysis.
Maybe if you can introduce yourself, because for the audience online.
Nabil Fahad, the Vice Chairman of the Chamber of Commerce of Beirut. The collapsing globalization that you talked about and the erection of tariff barriers, has created a completely new order. I mean, I was in the US last week. I mean, I was so shocked by the inflation there, prices. Would that inflation, come to hurt us in Lebanon? I mean, we are witnessing a stagnation in our economy over the past month that we were hoping that it would, kind of take off, but it has not. So if we combine that stagnation with the inflation that might be imported, we're seeing a major disaster. What do you think about that, and what can we avert it?
Yeah, no, so my statement was more the very beginning, because I don't think it's about collapsing globalization. I think it's a replacement of globalization. I think it's a different kind of. It's a different kind of globalization. One that is driven much more by bilateral, by transactional, by transactional relationships, by industrial policy, where countries decide who wins and who loses. That's the new order. And the other point I was trying to make is that within that new order, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. I actually think the Arab world is going to be a winner out of this. Right? I think we actually benefit. Short term, Nabil, I actually agree with you. I'm a bit concerned. The disruptions that are creating very, very fast could lead to an inflationary shock. That is, and I'm talking globally here, we can come back to talk about Lebanon. It could lead to an inflationary shock. I mean, this is I don't think it's as large as some alarmists are saying, but yeah, it could lead to a one-off increase in prices globally. It could also lead to a weakening of the global economy, right? Mainly because corporate sector is going to retrench until it sees where the world is going. They're going to say, I'm not going to invest, I'm going to cut back. This combination of these two things, higher prices, weaker economy, yes, could hurt us. I mean, we're like in the short term, this could be something that we have to be worried about here in Lebanon, right? I still think, I'm convinced that if we do our homework and continue on the path of reform, the catch-up process of Lebanon, of where Lebanon is to where Lebanon should be, will more than offset that negative impact on the global economy, right? So yes, I think what we're seeing globally worries me. It's going to have an impact on us, but that doesn't mean we should stop the reform that we're continuing, because the fruit of that reform is much higher.
Thanks, Amer. Salah and then
Salah Husayran from the Lebanese Economic Organization. I have actually two minor questions for both of you, one per question. Thank you first for this very interesting discussion, frankly, with two speakers that gives us a lot of food for thought. I will just come back to only two subjects, because there are many issues that are worth discussing. I mean, especially I have an issue with the train concept that I have a big issue, and it's not now the time to discuss who's driving trains and who's with us on the train. But at least I would like, you mentioned really, Mr. Bisat, in the beginning that it's now, and I agree, it's not anymore the time for multilateral agreements or trade relations, now bilateral, and subject to many issues. Frankly, we have been in this country, and really I'm going back to Azariya building and the country around the Azariya building. Here, the conference is about Lebanon's Arduous economic road. We have signed mainly two main economic cooperation agreements, one with the EU, which is called the Partnership, and one with the Arab countries, which is اتفاقية تيسير التجارة العربية. Let me tell you, when we signed the first one, the EU Partnership Agreement, our import from the EU was $3.3 billion. Our export was $600 million. 15 years later, our imports from the EU is $8 billion. Our export is $300 million. Wow. So definitely, there is something basically wrong with this, that we have to really go back to your word of having bilateral view of each item. And luckily, in this trade agreement, there is a lot of windows where we can sit and discuss with our partners. It cannot be a one way for 15 years and for the future to come. And the same with the Arab trade agreement. So I would like really to hear from you is, would you consider being in the right place in the government, at least to discuss with open minds with these people? Now, on the IMF situation, frankly, it cannot be more confusing and disturbing. And I, like all of us, we heard her in Qatar, and what drew my attention that she said, I have grand plans. I really wish that she shares these grand plans with us, because honestly, I don't see without a kind of a plan and an IMF relation, how can we really start going out of where we are? And unfortunately, I have some a feeling that it's just to delay a starting point of our exit from where we are now, that this is really pushing us to stay further in the dump. Okay. Sorry for this long question.
Sami, I suggest we take one other set of questions from Sami, and we're running out of time. Sami, do you want to go, and then we'll...
Sami Haddad, Lebanese citizen.
Former Minister of Economy.
Former, you had my seat at some point.
I agree that this is the best president, prime minister, and governor we have had in a long time. The problem is that we have lost 6 years. It's a lot of time. And things are really urgent. I will not go into politics because there are people who are more competent. I agree fully with the disarmament of Hezbollah yesterday and the Palestinians the day before yesterday. But I want to focus on something simple. We had one of the largest banking sectors in the world compared to our GDP. 6 years ago, the banking sector collapsed. It has been in a collapsed state for 6 years, and we have done nothing. This cannot go on. And what I would like to insist upon is the restructuring program, the law that will eventually pass through parliament, whatever, first is going to take some time politically. Second, even if the law is voted today, the implementation will take a long time. The country and the private sector cannot grow without a banking sector. We need a banking sector, as was said, as soon as possible. Now, I would insist on one thing: the government and the central bank need to do, and this is not being discussed, everything they can to encourage the creation of new banks. Because any restructuring of any sector in any country means an injection of equity, a lot of equity. It will take time. I don't want to now be polemic whether they're willing to inject equity. I have ideas on that. More importantly, we have a cash economy. We will not grow anywhere with the cash economy. And the cash economy will only disappear if you have a functioning banking sector. Okay. So this is extra urgent, and I will stop.
Okay. Albert, do you want to start?
No,
because you've tweeted. I actually was going to ask you about, before we ran out of time.
Yes.
The issue of the cash economy, the political question.
No, in fact, yeah. Thank you for bringing this subject up, Sami. So the cash economy is, for me, one of the biggest threats facing this country. It's also paradoxically an opportunity to reform, because I believe that the cash economy is worrying a lot many countries of this world, specifically the United States, and they are right to be worried about that, because cash economy not only means fiscal evasion, who is hurting the Lebanese government, not the US government, but it means also money laundering, drug trafficking, etc., which is alarming at globally. And here we are hearing some weird narrative about the cash economy that are not linking the cash economy to the root cause of the cash economy. Lebanese use cash not because they love paper bills that are ugly, by the way, the Lebanese one, not the US dollars one. Enough lèse-majesté for today, but because the banking system has collapsed, because we have no faith, no faith in anything, no trust in anything digital. So the external decision makers must understand that and reassess the linkage of the gap law, which is the big law to be discussed, that will eventually allow a banking sector to be rebooted and to live, again, that will, with the time, end the phenomenon of the cash economy. Cash economy will not disappear by its own. Now, this being said, I believe that the government, I don't know in whose realm this falls, if it is the Ministry of Economy or the central bank, but I believe we can take also intermediary measures also to diminish the size of cash economy. For example, in my private business, I'm trying to move away from cash, and I'm puzzled to see that the banks charge every transfer $60, $70, or $80 regardless of the amount. So you can do a transfer of $1,000, you get charged $70. So when I asked the bank, they said to me, because this is a SWIFT system, it travels to New York, etc. I don't care. How can I make a transfer and remove cash from my small business if I don't have an incentive in fares and tariffs, etc.? This should be done. I believe banks, auditors, and the whole ecosystem should scrutinize more businesses and force businesses to rely less and less on cash, because cash is by nature something quite suspicious. So auditors have a big role, a regulator have a role, while we are waiting for the big structuration of the system.
You want to take Salah's question?
I'll let Amer and...
Yeah, no, because I'm going to generalize the discussion to 2 topics, right? And both of them really fit into the double-clicking of the economic vision of where do we go from here. The first is the importance of trade. We're just not going to grow to where we need to be if we don't export more and import less, by definition, right? I mean, the days in which we grow just because we're consuming, days where we grow just because we borrow and we consume, should be over. Growth has to come from exporting more and importing less. Part of this, Salah, is going to be renegotiating the trade agreements. No question about it. And part of it is going to be looking into bilateral agreements that are more customized, more specific, more, right? Almost certainly, that hopefully will get us to export more and import less, do import substitution. But I would hate to say that that's the only way. That would be like creating magic, right? Trade agreements, changing them will help, but it's not. The real answer is going to be improving our competitiveness, making our production more competitive. And that's about lowering costs. Our cost of production is just too high, right? Electricity, ridiculously high, right? Taxes, right, on the formal sector, not the informal sector, extremely high. Telecommunication, very high. Infrastructure, and as a result, distribution, roads, very expensive. We need to be working on those. Once we improve our competitiveness, I'm completely convinced that private sector will either produce something that they can export or create import substitution against us, right? So yes, trade negotiations, super important. Reducing cost of production is, to my mind, more important. So point 1, we're not going to grow without trade. I think we need to do this. Second point, we're not going to grow without credit, right? And this is to Sami's point. I know the answer is new banks. Maybe yes, maybe no. Clearly the answer is restructuring the banking sector. I completely agree. Even if we do it today, we need a while to implement it, right? By definition, right? How do we open up the credit cycle now, right? I'm sort of, there are ways, right? I mean, financial engineering is a very ugly word in Lebanon, but there are smart structuring way in which we can benefit from excess capital, either in Lebanon itself, the amount of money that is sitting under right, if we can intermediate that amount that is sitting under the drawers, right? Using the excess capital of excess savings of our diaspora, right? Using the multilaterals, the development banks who are willing to do microfinance, right? Using some of the guarantees of places like MIGA. Right? We are not going to be able to grow immediately without more funding, and I think there are creative ways of doing it soon, rather than staying in this way where we literally eat what we have. Like, we're very liquidity constrained today. I think we need to start leveraging a bit more. We need to start creating no credit, and we need to be thinking creatively about this while we are restructuring the banking sector.
Okay. We have a lot of questions, and we only have 10 minutes left. So I will ask you to be very brief in your questions, please, and then ask Amer and Albert to be brief in their answers. Kamal.
Yes, Kamal Hamdan, Executive Director of the Consultation and Research Institute. Well, I will focus on one major point, is the need to reform the private sector. I think that it's true. We need to make a lot of reform in different spheres, financial, fiscal, monetary, macro, etc. But with respect to the private sector, we should recognize that a great part of the big and middle firms are politically connected. And there are a lot of studies and statistics about the phenomena of politically connected firms in Lebanon. Second, we have a great weight of the, in our economy, we have a great share of non-tradable goods and services, and this will limit to a great extent the competitiveness of the private sector in Lebanon. Third, the last surveys show that the informality is covering more than 50% of the firm and more than 60% of the labor force. It's a huge problem. In addition to that, we should recognize also
Kamal.
What's
the question,
we
Kamal?
should exit from the mentality of focusing mainly on low jobs, low salaries, low skills. And this is the other side of the export of our human resources. Last, I agree with Albert. It's one of the major points politically is the instrumentalization of the sectarian system for private purposes and interests.
I can say many of us, or most of us, agree with that. Okay, في هون قميص وليد.
Hi, Walid Fakhreddin. I've heard the discussion about the role of the private sector and basically curving this or shifting the curve we're in. But for a private sector to be prosperous, to act, we really need to think of key things. The unique selling proposition of Lebanon have changed. There's a big change around us. There was a controlled economy in Syria ever since anyone can remember. Now we're going to go in an open economy, and that will be a major competitors. The Abraham Accords means that Haifa port is going to be back the main port on the Mediterranean and not Beirut port. So it's not only about private sector doing their job, and they are doing their jobs. We're talking about a bunch of reforms that are necessary for the private sector to work, a social protection policy that's effective because we need to protect the people of this country, a functional banking sector. And this cannot start by adopting a very disappointing budget based on some accounting figures done by the Miati government and adopted by this government, which is really a surprise. And how can we curve this without a general reform with all the key stakeholders in this country? We need to build a different vision. And this is
Walid,
the role.
Walid.
Thank you.
Okay, jump back. Sorry. Come back.
Hello, I just want to agree with you and say that I think Lebanon is definitely...
Can you introduce yourself,
Yeah, I'm
please?
Karen Kazarian from Haigazian University. I agree that Lebanon is very attractive, and I think it's one of the easiest countries to solve. I have a question to you. Why not talk directly to, for example, CMA, CGM, Renfe, TGV, Chinese companies, and offer them contracts, streamline the bureaucracy, let them have our ports, rebuild the railway system? Wouldn't that in itself help our country? Like, is there any policy to do that?
Thank you. All right. Too many hands. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. So, go to the back, to Adib. But Kamen, please, I really need very quick questions. لأنه we've run out of time. And then we have two more.
I am a supporter of the government, but Mr. Bisat didn't convince me at all.
Okay.
My name is Adib Nami. I am, I don't know, consultant in development. You didn't convince me. I expect more. In the analysis of what is happening globally, I saw that in 48 hours, the Arab countries in the Gulf lost $4 trillion. So we are not winning, and the train is going to hell. So we don't catch it.
Let's stay here then.
Adib, please, a question, if there is a question.
Okay, my question is, why do they not explain the results?
Lahza,
Yeah,
please.
you said everything about the role of private sector and even society, but I was expecting that there is a role for the government. We
Okay.
cannot do anything.
So what role for the state, Amer? Okay. Alright, بعدين لقدام please.
في سؤال.
تفضل بس بسرعة.
Jad Hani, I'm here on behalf of Al-Mudun. I have a question. It's now clear that there are some stakeholders that are against a deal with the IMF. They're trying to portray the IMF as the villain, and this is projecting with a lot of its information online and on some TV channels. The same team has been voting for the current governor of the central bank, whereas some ministers were against. And Mr. Bisat, you've mentioned alignment.
Question, please.
Yeah, you've mentioned alignment with the governor in DC. So how did that happen? I'm not sure if it's clear, but how did this alignment become available, whereas some ministers were against the current governor, and it's clear that there is some policy
All right,
discrepancies.
thank you. There's a question here. Sorry. Really sorry. I have to finish.
Salim Shaheen, Central Bank of Lebanon. I'm going to change a bit the questions, the nature of the questions. We recently had a major earthquake in our neighboring Syria country, right? And this earthquake could be followed by a series of other earthquakes or a major change.
You mean the lifting of sanctions as a positive earthquake?
So the question to you is, what are the opportunities, implications from an economic and political perspective that you see for our country?
But أعتذر يعني I really have to apologize but we can't take any more questions. So great question, spill over from the lifting of sanctions in Lebanon. I said, I clarified the earthquake لأنه they did have an earthquake last year, so an actual earthquake, but a different kind. All right. Amer, let me begin with you and then with Albert.
Let me pick up on a couple of points. I'm not going to answer all of them. And maybe I should have been more articulate about it. There's no question that the file of resuscitating the state and rebuilding it as an institution is a prerequisite for growth. The emphasis on the private sector is in my mind, is paramount, but this cannot happen without the state as an enabler of growth, right? And this is part of the project. Right? The Lebanese state right now, and I know this is going to be controversial. It's way too. We're spending less than $4 billion right now, right? And most of it's going inefficiently to wages, right? The reality is the state should be spending more on infrastructure. It should be spending more on regulation. It should be spending more on, right? It should, like the relationship between the state and the society is extremely confrontational, negative. We need to rebuild that. Part of the project is rebuilding the state. We are not going to be able to get to where we are without the state as an institution getting reformed. Part of that, and that's the question I was asked by the young gentleman from Hagazian, is that it has to be partly a private-public sector effort. And I am a little bit overwhelmed by the bureaucracy of this country, which is making these things much harder than they should be. Hopefully we can streamline that process so that we can actually move much faster, but that's clearly an answer, right? Rebuilding the state and strengthening the relationship between the state and the private sector. Syria, I'm actually quite, we've been spending a lot of time thinking, writing a note on the possibilities of where we can win from the Syria changes, right? And they're enormous, right? They're enormous at the macro level. Historically, the linkages between Lebanon and Syria are very, very powerful. We've been severed recently, or at least not severed. The relationship is still very strong, but done in an informal, smuggling way. If we can normalize it, make it more, we can all win. The construction sector architecture sector, the financial sector could benefit a lot, the tourism sector. I mean, to me, it's a win-win. If Syria wins, we are going to win as well if we reintegrate the smart way. So rebuild the state and sort of become a winner in the Syria change is a priority.
Well, maybe a personal note, because you mentioned railways, and I'm a big fan of railways, not just for the economical value of railways, but I believe that railways is essential to nation building and to connecting Lebanese. And we lack in this country a public space. Everything that is public has been destroyed. And one of my personal dreams is to rehabilitate, not alone, of course, but to see the railway being rehabilitated in Lebanon. And I believe it is a feasible project. On Syria, I believe it's a huge opportunity, so I have nothing more to add to what Amer said. Maybe just an angle, I believe it could be an interesting incentive to the banks also to finally settle, because today we are no more in this constrained world where banks were pushing back. I believe today it is in the interest of bankers, and I have a dialogue with many bankers in this country, and they are increasingly aware that, first of all, their P&L is negative for a lot of the banks. So they are burning cash in OPEX and some of the circulars of the central bank. Second, Syria presents a huge opportunity. Banking sectors in both countries are interlinked since the creation of Banque de Syrie et du Liban and Lebanese. First, in the 50s and 60s, it was Syrian bankers who came to Lebanon, and in the 90s and 2000, it was Lebanese bankers who went back to Syria. So it's very, very interesting to see that those sectors are linked, and it's a huge opportunity for the Lebanese banking sector. So I hope they grasp it. But for us to succeed in Syria and to tackle the growth, we need to restructure in Lebanon. So I hope it will be an incentive.
Amer, Albert, thank you for, I think, what turned out to be a fascinating discussion. It's time to end this conversation for today, at least. There will be many more, I'm sure. Thank you again, and thank you for the audience for joining us.